This is an audiobook of the Misapplication of the Biblical Term Gentile, written by Clifton A. Emahiser, narrated by Blood and Creed, found on truthvids.net. Beginning. We are about to examine how the Latin word Gentile was introduced into our present Bibles. Yes, Gentile is a Latin word, but no Bible writer ever used the term, as there is no such word in Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek. The first time that the Latin word Gentile ever appeared in any Bible is when Jerome translated the original manuscripts from Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek into Latin. Secondly, and more importantly, in Jerome's day, the Latin term Gentile, or Gentilis, never had today's corrupted definition meaning non-Jew. The Junior Classic Latin Dictionary, published by Wilcox and Follett Company in 1945, defines Gentilis, quote, of the same clan or race, end quote. Surely a word consistent with all of Scripture, like Amos 3:2 and Matthew 15:24, etc. Following Jerome's example, the later English translators chose the Latin gentilis, or Gentile, for their translations in place of the original Greek word ethnos, because Jerome, when he made the Latin Vulgate, used the word gentilis to translate the Greek ethnos into Latin. In other words, Paul was sent to the people of his own ethnicity. How, where, or when the term Gentile first took on the corrupted meaning of non-Jew cannot be definitely determined, but that was not the original meaning in Latin, nor is the word Gentile found in any of the Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek manuscripts. Paul never uttered or wrote the word Gentiles. Rather, Paul used only the Greek word ethnoi, the nations, and knew that he was going to those same nations found at Genesis chapter 17 verse 6 and chapter 35 verse 11. To use the term Gentile in an improper manner only exposes that person's lack of intelligence. Today, the Latin term Gentile has become so corrupted that it no longer denotes its original meaning. What is even worse, hardly any biblical lexicon, dictionary, or commentary helps to clear up the confusion concerning the use of the word. The best source that I have found to clear up the matter is the American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language, William Morris, editor, published by Houghton Mifflin Company in 1976, and even this source leaves some things to be desired. Much confusion is caused as a result of all of this. First of all, the American Heritage Dictionary describes Gentile both as an adjective and a noun. As an adjective, it is described in part, Gentile, of or pertaining to the gens or to the tribal society based on it, a number of a gens. Latin gentilis, from gens, clans. Narrator's note. Apologies if the definitions are hard to follow or understand. They're rather difficult to narrate. You can read them in the essay that is provided in the description. Continuing. In order to fully understand this definition, we must next refer to gens in this same dictionary. Quote, gens, gentes, the particular clan forming the basic unit of the Roman tribe and having originally a common name, land, cult, and burial ground. Secondly, anthropology, an exogamous patrilineal clan, Latin gens, clan, see gene, end quote. Again, in order to understand the gens connection, we must go to the appendix of gene, in part, quote, gene, also gen, to give birth, beget, with derivatives referring to aspects and results of procreation and to familial and tribal groups, end quote. It should be clear here that the term Gentile is a Latin term used among the Romans to designate certain racial privileges and rights based on race. Therefore, this would have been the meaning of the term Gentile near the end of the 4th century AD, when Jerome compiled his Vulgate translation of the Bible. And as one can plainly see, this definition had no affinity to the meaning of non-Jew later during the Middle English period, around 1150 to 1475 AD. According to the American Heritage Dictionary, the capitalized term Gentile was changed from an adjective to a noun with a corrupted meaning, thusly, quote, Gentile, anyone who is not of the Jewish faith or is of a non-Jewish nation, a Christian as distinguished from a Jew, a pagan or a heathen. Among Mormons, a person who is not a Mormon, or of relating to a Gentile. End quote. It is very important here that we notice that the American Heritage Dictionary specifies under Late Latin, which is 150 to 700 AD, Jerome living in the 4th century, that Gentile essentially held its original meaning of, quote, the same clan, from gens, clans, end quote. So the meaning of Gentile all boils down to which time period, whether Late Latin or Middle English is considered. It makes a lot of difference. Therefore, it is evident that sometime after Jerome's translation, the meaning had changed 180 degrees. To make all of this simple, let's review the main points. The term Gentile cannot be found in any ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek biblical manuscripts. The term Gentile is a Latin word, and in the late Latin period, which is 150 to 700 AD, it was first used in the Latin Vulgate by Jerome and meant, quote, of the same clan or race. Later, during the Middle English period, about 1150 to 1475 AD, the Latin term Gentile was changed from an adjective to a noun with a capital G, and the meaning was perverted to mean a non-Jew, which it never had before. Why is it that we, as a people, do not understand these things today? The answer is, we do not know who we are. It has been hidden from us. Psalms chapter 83 verses 2 to 3, quote, Keep not thou silence, O God, hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. End quote. Psalm chapter 83 makes it very clear that the hidden ones are Israel, and the enemies of Israel are the tabernacles of Edom, the Ishmaelites, Moab, the Hagarenes, Gebal, Ammon, Amalek, the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre, and Assur. This is the very same cabal that have infiltrated and are arrayed against the New Jerusalem, which is America and Christendom today. Now when the Almighty hides something, no one is going to find it. He has hidden Israel so well that they can't even find themselves. Therefore, one can be an Israelite and not even be aware of it. And no one is ever going to come to the knowledge they are an Israelite, unless his spirit reveals the matter to him. Yahweh has a sovereign will and a permissive will, and unless he chooses to let one understand he is an Israelite, he will never comprehend it. One can confront such a person with the Israel truth until he is blue in the face, and it will be like water running off a duck's back. So, if the reader is one of those chosen of him to come to this knowledge, the rest of this paper is for you. Not only has the Latin term Gentile been turned 180 degrees around to mean the exact opposite of what it originally conveyed, but the identity of true Israel and the non-Israel heathen has been completely reversed. For instance, those calling themselves Jews today are neither Israel nor Judah, but are a mixture of Kenite, that is the descendants of Cain, Edomite, Hittite, Canaanite, plus other racial strains who were proselytized to Judaism during the reign of John Hyrcanus in 123 BC. See Revelations chapter 2 verse 9 and 3 verse 9, and Josephus's Antiquities 13:9-1. These proselytes also perverted Israel's religion. I don't ask the reader to believe this simply because I say that it is so, but to prove it one way or the other for himself. Don't ask your pastor, as most of them are as blind as a bat on this subject. Among the Jews there is a group referred to as Sephardim, who are a mixture of a few of the formerly racially pure Judahites of the tribe of Judah, who had committed miscegenation with some of the Canaanite tribes, and Jeremiah condemns them at chapter 2 verses 21-22, quote, "Yet I had planted thee, Judah, a noble vine, wholly a right seed," which is racial. "How then art thou turned into a degenerate, or race-mixed, plant of a strange vine unto me? For though thou wash thee with nitre, and make thee much soap, yet thine iniquity is marked before me, saith Yahweh Elohim." End quote. But the vast majority of those calling themselves Jews are the Ashkenazim of Khazaria, which make up better than 90% of them today. This branch of Jewry never came from old Judea, but were converted to Judaism in 926 AD. Evidence of this is found in the Jews' own chronicle, The History of the Jews, by Heinrich Gretz, Volume 3 of 7 volumes, page 139. Quote, "It was through these Greek Jews that the Khazars became acquainted with Judaism. As interpreters or merchants, physicians or counselors, the Jews were known and beloved by the Khazar court, and they inspired the warlike King Bulan with a love of Judaism. In subsequent times, however, the Khazars had but a vague knowledge of the motive which induced their forefathers to embrace Judaism. One of their later Khagans gives the following account of their conversation. The King Bulan conceived a horror of the foul idolatry of his ancestors, and prohibited its exercise within his dominions, without, however, adopting any other form of religion. He was encouraged by a dream in his endeavours to discover the proper manner of worshipping God. Having gained a great victory over the Arabs, and conquered the Armenian fortress of Ardalib, Bulan determined to adopt the Jewish religion openly." End quote. And he did. This event is also recorded under Khazars in the 1980 Collier's Encyclopedia, Volume 14, page 65. Not only this, but the Canaanite Edomite Jews mixed their blood with the Indians of India, the Chinese, the Indian tribes of Mexico, and the blacks of Nubia, to name but a few. Once one comes to a realization that the people calling themselves Jews today are neither Israel nor Judah, one has surmounted one of the major hurdles in grasping the true context of the Bible. Putting this knowledge together with a proper comprehension of the Latin term Gentile, which in most cases should have been rendered nations, one can begin to understand that the Apostle Paul was sent to the lost tribes of Israel who had become nations, a proper Greek translation. At no time did Paul countermand the teachings of Yahshua Christ, for we read at 1 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 1, quote, "Be ye followers of me, even as I also am of Christ." End quote. Paul, in effect, was saying, if I follow not Yahshua Christ in any way, shape, or manner, then do not follow me, but follow me only to the extent in which I myself follow Christ. And Yahshua Christ himself said, quote, "I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel." End quote. We read that at Matthew chapter 15 verse 24. Therefore, if Paul went to someone other than the lost tribes of Israel, he wouldn't have been following Yahshua Christ. Let's now consider some of the true biblical and secular history of the tribes of Israel. There were 12 tribes of Israel, namely 1. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Joseph, and Benjamin. The two sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, were each given the status of a half-tribe. In that respect, the tribes were 13. In the beginning, the 12 tribes were united into one nation known as Israel under the judges. Then 3 kings in succession, Saul, David, and Solomon. After that, the kingdom was divided and 10 tribes formed the northern kingdom. They had 19 kings from Jeroboam to Hosea, while Judah and Benjamin remained south. From 745 to 727 BC, Tiglath-Pileser reigned over Assyria, and at 2 Kings chapter 15 verse 29 we read, quote, "In the days of Pekah, king of Israel, came Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and took Ijon, and Abel-Beth-Maachah, and Genoa, and Kadesh, and Hazor, and Gilead, and Galilee, all the land of Naphtali, and carried them captive to Assyria." End quote. Take note of the King James Version spelling. This is also confirmed at 1 Chronicles chapter 5 verse 26, quote, "And the God of Israel stirred up the spirit of Pul, king of Assyria, and the spirit of Tilgath-Pilneser, king of Assyria, and he carried them away, even the Reubenites, and the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and brought them unto Halah, and Habor, and Harah, and to the river Gozan, unto this day." End quote. There is no record that any of these ever returned. The next deportation of the northern kingdom of Israel was by King Shalmaneser of Assyria, who reigned from 727 to 722 BC, spoken of at 2 Kings chapter 18 verses 9 to 11, quote, "And it came to pass in the 4th year of King Hezekiah, which was the 7th year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, that Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, came up against Samaria, and besieged it. And at the end of 3 years they took it. Even in the 6th year of Hezekiah, that is the 9th year of Hoshea, king of Israel, Samaria was taken. And the king of Assyria did carry away Israel unto Assyria, and put them in Halah, and in Habor, by the river of Gozan, and in the city of the Medes. End quote. Neither did any of these return to Samaria. The third and last deportation of the northern kingdom was by Sargon II of Assyria, who reigned from 722 to 705 BC, and does not appear in Old Testament history. Isaiah makes one passing reference to him, but his dealings with Israel find no mention in the sacred writings. But Sargon himself had left the following inscription, quote, "In the beginning of my reign, the city of Samaria I besieged. I captured 27,280 of its inhabitants I carried away, 50 chariots in the midst of them I collected, and the rest of their goods I seized. I set my governor over them, and laid upon them tribute and taxes like those of the Assyrians." End quote. The Bible reference here that alludes to Sargon is at Isaiah chapter 20 verse 1. Quote, "In the year that Tartan came unto Ashdod," when Sargon the king of Assyria sent him, "and fought against Ashdod and took it." End quote. Neither did any of these return. The fourth assault by Assyria was by Sennacherib, who reigned from 705 to 681 BC, and deported Judahites from the southern kingdom of Judah to Assyria. The Bible records this at 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 13. Quote, "Now, in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, did Sennacherib, king of Assyria, come up against all the fenced cities of Judah, and took them." End quote. While the scriptures are silent on the subject of deportations at this time, Sennacherib himself was left the following record, quote, "And Hezekiah, king of Judah, who had not bowed down at my feet, 46 of his strong cities, his castles, and the smaller towns in their neighborhood, beyond number with warlike engines, I attacked and captured 200,150 people, small and great, male and female, horses, mares, asses, camels, oxen, and sheep beyond number. From the midst of them I carried off and distributed them as a spoil. He himself, like a bird in a cage, inside Jerusalem, his royal city, I shut him up." End quote. After Sennacherib's attack, all that was left of Judea was the city of Jerusalem by itself. Neither did any of the Judahites taken by Sennacherib to Assyria return back to Judea. At this point in our story, nearly all of the 12 tribes of Israel, or 13 tribes depending on how one might count them, are in dispersion, never to return to their homeland. But this is not the end of the dispersions, as there are more yet to come. On the horizon, the Neo-Babylonian Empire was in its ascendancy, while the Assyrian Empire was being overthrown. Upon the Neo-Babylonian Empire coming into power, Nebuchadnezzar ascended his throne and imposed a heavy yoke upon the king and the kingdom of Judah in his first year of rule. Nebuchadnezzar would reign from 604 to 561 BC. This is confirmed at Jeremiah chapter 25, verse 1. Quote, "The word that came to Jeremiah concerning all the people of Judah in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah. That was the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon." End quote. Under Nebuchadnezzar, there were 3 deportations of Judahites from Judea to Babylon, and all that were left were the poorest of the land. Of those deported, many would never ever return to Judea. After 70 years of captivity in Babylon, in his first year as ruler over Babylon, Cyrus, king of Persia, 538 BC, he issued a royal decree to the effect that the exiled Judeans were free to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the house of Yahweh. See Ezra chapter 1 verses 1 to 4. It was a long and dusty trip, which included 42,360 males, besides slaves and professional singers carrying with them the temple treasure. They arrived at Jerusalem in time to celebrate the Feast of Booths in the 7th month in 537 BC. We see from all of this that of all the millions of Israelites of the northern 10-tribe kingdom of Israel, and the Judahites, Benjamites, and a smattering of Levites of the southern 2-tribe kingdom of Judah, only 42,360 returned to Jerusalem, and of those 42,360, not all of them could verify their Judahite, Benjamite, or Levite genealogy. Except for a couple of persons mentioned in the New Testament, of the millions of Israelites from the northern and southern kingdoms of Israel and Judah, only 42,360 returned again to Judea. We can be quite sure that this is true, as the Almighty proclaimed in no uncertain words that this is the way that it would be. This declaration by Yahweh can be found at Hosea chapter 2 verse 6, quote, "Therefore, behold, I will hedge up thy way with thorns, and make a wall, that she shall not find her paths." End quote. In other words, the house of Israel, or the house of Judah, may attempt to return to Samaria or Judea, but they will shed much blood in the process, and their way will be blocked at every turn. For instance, during the period from the end of the 11th century until the end of the 13th century AD, expeditions and wars were conducted by the Christians of Europe to uphold the rights of pilgrims at Jerusalem, to ultimately establish a firm foothold for Christianity in Palestine. These expeditions and wars were called the Crusades, and were first instigated by Pope Urban II. For those who volunteered, they were promised remission of sins, and all who died in the expedition got immediate entry into paradise. Over this period, there were 8 crusades in all, not including the pitiful Children's Crusade. The people who took part in these crusades were of the 12 lost tribes of Israel. They did manage to take Jerusalem for a while, but in the end, the Muslims regained the territory back again. The empire founded by the Crusaders expired with the capture of Acre by the Sultan of Egypt in 1291. As a result of the Crusades, thousands upon thousands of Israelite men and boys died for the Pope's cause. Summation. With this paper, it becomes quite clear that not everything that is taught in nominal Christianity is true. It should now be obvious that the term Gentile was never in any of the original Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek manuscripts. Secondly, it should now be apparent that after Jerome introduced the Latin term Gentile into his Vulgate translation in the late Latin period, which is 150 to 700 AD, Jerome living in the 4th century, that by the Middle English period, which is 1150 to 1475 AD, a corrupted definition of non-Jew had been adopted. Therefore, today the clergy has erroneously reduced the world's population down to two categories, Jew and non-Jew, calling any non-Jew a Gentile. Also, with this essay, we see that the Apostle Paul didn't go to any so-called Gentiles, but to the lost 12 tribes of Israel who had become nations, a proper rendering of the Greek word ethnos. We then checked the biblical and secular records of the several dispersions of the 12 tribes of Israel, and how only a very small remnant of 42,360 of the southern kingdom ever returned to their homeland. Last of all, evidence was presented from Scripture that Yahweh would cause a hedge and a wall to be placed between the 12 tribes of Israel and their former homeland, preventing their return. And though the Crusaders were able to establish a foothold in Palestine for a short period, in the end they were unable to hold it, and had to retreat back to their newfound home in Europe. This paper has been an endeavor to show the reader how out of context today's clergy is twisting Yahweh's word to their own destruction. Responsibility now falls on the reader's shoulder. End of audiobook. Misapplication of the biblical term Gentile. Written by Clifton A. Emahiser. Unabridged. Narrated by Blood and Creed. Found on truthvids.net.